So to kick off today, I want to start with a video.
How do professionals get better at what they do? How do they get great? And there are two views about this. One is the traditional view. That is that you go to school, you study, you practice, you learn, you graduate. And then you go out into the world and you make your way on your own. That's how doctors learn. That's how lawyers do, scientists. Now the contrasting view comes out of sports. And they say you are never done. Everybody needs a coach. The greatest in the world needs a coach. So I tried to think about this as a surgeon. Pay someone to come into my operating room, observe me, and critique me. It seems absurd. Expertise means not needing to be coached. So then which view is right? Turns out there are numerous problems in making it on your own. You don't recognize the issues that are standing in your way, or if you do, you don't necessarily know how to fix them. And the result is that somewhere along the way, you stop improving. And I thought about that, and I realized that was exactly what had happened to me as a surgeon. So I asked a former professor of mine who had retired, his name is Bob Osteen, and he agreed to come to my operating room and observe me. The case, I remember that first case, it went beautifully. I didn't think there would be anything much he'd have to say when we were done. Instead, he had a whole page of dense with notes. Just small things, he said. Did you notice that the light had swung out of the wound during the case? Another thing I noticed, he said, your elbow goes up in the air every once in a while. That means you're not in full control. It was a whole nother level of awareness. He was describing what great coaches do. And what they do is they are your external eyes and ears, providing a more accurate picture of your reality. They're recognizing the fundamentals. They're breaking your actions down and then helping you build them back up again. After 2 months of coaching, I felt myself getting better again. And after a year, I saw my complications drop down even further. It was painful. I didn't like being observed. And at times I didn't want to have to work on things. I also felt there were periods where I would get worse before I got better. But it made me realize that the coaches were onto something profoundly important. I think it's not just how good you are now, I think it's how good you're gonna be that really matters.
So tell me what you thought. Like, what thoughts went through your head as you watched this? Anybody?
Well, that's just a really good point, a really interesting way to look at it, that being professionals in this world often means, yeah, you've learned enough, and now you're just going to practice. Or, you're just going to do it. And it is kind of the way things are set up. Like, when you're good enough, you get to the point where you don't really need people watching you. But, of course, there's always room for improvement, and you can just get so plateaued and not realize it.
Yeah, it's funny.
You have to have a lot of self-discipline to change about something, like studying.
A lot. And then the problem is, because part of the problem is you don't have visibility. It's perspective, which is not an element up there, but it's our new perspective. It's our new element, which is when you are you lose perspective because of immediacy. You are so close to you and what you do and what's around you that you lose perspective. And so, this surgeon started recognizing that, like, I'm not getting better. I mean, he's a surgeon. He's like paid a ton of money and he's a surgeon and he's an expert. And he's been doing it for a long time. So it takes a certain amount of humility to subject yourself to say, will you come in and coach me and critique me and tell me what I'm doing wrong? But this relentless desire to grow, a relentless desire to grow is what distinguishes people who are successful in life from people who just stall and stagnate. I love what he said. He said, you stop recognizing issues. You stop recognizing what stands in your way, and you stop progressing. And I think it's so interesting because each of us in our lives have these moments, these periods of time where we reach a plateau and we just stop progressing. And unfortunately, people will spend decades there. Some people never escape that plateau of stagnation. A coach is someone who refuses, a leader is someone who refuses to let you stay where you are because they know where you can go. They know what you can do and what you can be. And so it's funny because if we don't get access to a leader and a coach and a guide, then we tend to stay in that plateau. And it's not that we're bad. It's not that it's just that it's the default state. The default state is to stay exactly where you are. And so a leader is a catalyst. So who's the chemist? Who's the chemist in here? What's a catalyst? Who can tell me what a catalyst is? Come on. You're in college.
I don't think you
Do you remember what catalyst? Austin? Ellie's ready.
I know.
Okay, Ellie, go for it.
Something that helps something react quicker.
Yes.
Faster.
Okay, so man, if you ever want to have some really cool, amazing learning, study physics and chemistry. So it's interesting. What happens is here you have a natural state, okay? And for now, we'll say this is a chemical, but it could just as easily be your life or anyone's life. Now, what happens is there's so down here is time, and up here is energy. And what happens is it takes a lot of energy in order to reach what's called a chemical reaction, where now that energy drops and you're still moving forward. You're at time and progress. So you're moving forward, but now it's taking so much less energy. And then what happens is you have a little rebound, and then you do that all again. This is what's called activation energy. What a coach does is it helps us achieve, a leader helps us achieve activation energy. Because each of us have objectives. We have goals. We have an identity that we're trying to build. We have critical context that we're trying to manage. And it takes energy to get there. Do you remember how we talked about time, talent, and energy in the iceberg? And of the three, time, talent, and energy matters most. You guys remember that? It takes a lot of energy to do stuff. We reduce the amount of energy required to move forward in life when we have access to a coach, because a coach provides the help, the guidance, and the facilitation to get past that. And so that's the activation energy. I love this quote by David Foster Wallace. Have you guys ever listened to his TED Talk? Oh, it's amazing. Yeah, he has this great TED Talk. I believe his is the one, what is water? No, is this water? Anyway, it's fantastic. So he said this. He says, a real leader is somebody who can help us overcome the limitations of our own individual laziness and selfishness and weakness and fear, and get us to do better, harder things than we can get ourselves to do on our own. There are just inherent limits that we face. There are just inherent constraints on our ability to perform and endure and succeed. And a leader and a coach provides the activation energy to overcome those hurdles that by ourselves we fail to be able to overcome. So do you remember this? So, we have, it's funny because when you come across a true principle, you'll see it replicated everywhere across nature. It's like the golden spiral. You guys know what the golden spiral is? Yeah, it's like the golden spiral. You see it all over. So you see, you see this design, and so let's go back through this again. This was Gartner, who's the business analyst firm, who is, what was that? Oh, yes, very good, yes, I love it. And, so the business analyst firm studied the way technologies or products move through a market, and what they find is that there's a start, and then there's a peak of inflated expectation where the market is like, oh my gosh, this is gonna change my life, it's gonna change the world, it's gonna be amazing. And then it doesn't, and so the market hits the trough of disillusionment, and everybody's like, oh, this product sucks, and it's never gonna do anything, and you forget about it. Over time, it goes through the slope of enlightenment until it hits the plateau of productivity where it stays until a little bit later when what happens, interestingly, from a business standpoint, is that product loses relevancy because the market outgrows, it can't keep up with the way that with the market's demands. And then it either has to reinvent itself or another product comes and competes and reinvents it, because it's really hard for us to change our nature as companies. As an individual, we do the same thing. We talked about engagement. You get engaged and you're like, oh my gosh, Ellie's engaged. It's like, oh my gosh, it's gonna be amazing. We're never gonna argue. We're always gonna want the same food, spend money the same way. And then it's like, maybe 6 months after you're married, you're like, oh, his breath stinks, and then he snores, and every relationship, customer relationships, spouse relationships, parent-child relationships, every relationship goes through a trough of disillusionment. And you stick through it, and you're powered, motivated by love and empathy and understanding, and you get to the slope of enlightenment and you reach the plateau of productivity. But we never can stay there. We always go back into this dip. Well, the reality is, if we want to be successful, and this is what life engineering is all about. Life engineering is the science of getting out of the dip. It's the science of overcoming the dip, because everyone else in life stays either in the dip or in the plateau. They plateau and then they languish and they live there for decades or the rest of their lives. Life engineering is the science of getting out of the dip, getting out of the plateau, achieving the activation energy that is necessary for you to move forward in life. So here's a video that is the perfect illustration. You've probably seen this. This was big on social a little bit ago. You've probably seen this. If you haven't, you'll like it. But this is the perfect illustration of the dip. Have you guys seen this? You seen this? Yeah? Okay. This is the perfect illustration of the dip. A mama bear and a baby bear climbing up this icy cliff face. And the baby bear's like, Mama, wait! Trying, these little legs are just a churning. Hawks are flying by. Like, that's a yummy baby bear. And the mom was like, just sitting there. You got this, buddy. You can do it. Oh, no! But he just keeps going.
So cute.
He just keeps going. He's like, okay, I gotta make it. I gotta make it.
Serpentine this way. Oh.
Now it's interesting because the mom doesn't climb down and help him up. He sits there. The mom sits there, and the baby gets right there, right at the top. Oh! And this is where people stop.
Oh.
This is the dip. And it's like at this point, people start telling themselves, I'm never going to succeed. Look how far away. Ah! And they get to the cliff. And they're like, look how far away. And they give up and they stop. But the right people, with the access to the right leadership, someone who believes in you, someone who tells you you can do there, and someone who has the ability to stand at the end and call to you and motivate you and keep you coming. Like, look at this baby bear climb all the way back up. All the way. And it just keeps those little tiny legs like, I just gotta keep going.
She almost had him too.
She did. She was like, come on, buddy. It was so close. And at any time, she could have like climbed down and pushed her up, pushed the baby up. But she recognized that growth requires the effort of getting out of the dip yourself. And there he goes.
Oh, they're off.
And they're like, okay, and no rest for the weary. Isn't that great? I love it. That's the dip. That's what's called the dip. And life is about getting through the dip. One thing we have to recognize about the dip is that when you find yourself in a dip, when you're here, wherever these dips are in your life, because the first thing is to recognize this is a natural state. This is natural. Doesn't mean you're a loser. It doesn't mean that you're a failure. It doesn't mean you should stop trying. It just means you're in the dip. It's no big deal. We all go through these dips. The question is, how do we get out of these dips? Well, it turns out there was a book written by one of my favorite authors called The Dip by Seth Godin, which is all about getting out of the dip. And I love this quote that he says in this book. He says, one of his headings in this is, the dip is where success happens. If you haven't already realized it. If you haven't already realized it, the dip is the secret to your success. The people who set out to make it through the dip, the people who invest. Oh, I love it when people use my elements in their book.
Yeah.
I should charge them. The people who invest the time and the energy and the effort to power through the dip, those are the ones who become the best in the world. They're breaking the system because instead of moving on to the next thing, saying, I can't make it, therefore I will quit or stay, instead of moving on to the next thing, instead of doing slightly above average and settling for what they've got, they embrace the challenge, growth. They embrace the challenge. For whatever reason, they refuse to abandon the quest, and they push through the dip all the way to the next level. It's getting out of the dip. That's what life is all about, because every single person is going to find themselves in the dip, and people go on missions and find themselves in the dip. People go to college and find themselves in the dip. People graduate from college and start life and find themselves in the dip. And they get in that dip, and like this bear, they try to climb up and then they slide back down. They try to climb up, they slide back. They try to climb up and they go all the way to the cliff and they almost fall off, and they're like, I'm not going to do that again. I'm going to die. But the people who are successful, and the spirit of a true life engineer is someone who says, I am going to be relentless about the pursuit of my objective, because I've been deliberate enough to choose objectives that align to my identity. And these are not things that I'm going to abandon easily. These are things that I care enough about that I'm going to invest and grow until I achieve it. Well, it turns out there's a few main things that keep people in the dip. For some reason, they get stuck. For some reason, or they get stuck, they start to feel all alone. So this happens because getting out of the dip, progressing in life often requires that you have to leave where you've been. Moving forward sometimes means moving on. And sometimes that means saying goodbye. And sometimes when you do that, you find yourself all alone, like that baby bear, and he gets far away from his mom. And it's like, you feel lonely, you feel isolated, you feel like there's no one to help. And so they languish, they give up. Another is that they feel out of place. This is a new environment. This is a new setting. This is a new world. And we're not accustomed to it, because we look around ourselves and we're like, we feel like a foreigner here. We stop. Next is we get burned out. Well, turns out there is an element for that. When you get stuck, you have access to a leader, a mentor, a guide. These are the people who help you recognize why you're stuck, because sometimes we don't know why we're stuck. Sometimes we don't even know that we're stuck. A mentor, a leader, or a guide helps us get unstuck. relationships involving others in our journey, sometimes different others than the others that we were on in our prior journey, allows us to feel like we're not alone. Architecting our environment to support our success allows us to never feel out of place no matter what we're trying to accomplish. And this principle of renewal and balance and moderation helps make sure that we don't get burned out. These are the secrets to overcoming the dip. So we're going to talk a little bit more about this dip and the energy, the activation energy required for us to get out of the dip when we find ourselves in the dip. So, because remember the principle of, who remembers what the principle of entropy is? So entropy is this state that all things tend towards disorder. Have you ever been, like taking a pot that has grease in it, and you put water in it, and the grease, is and then you take a thing of soap and you drop it in there, and it so entropy is that all things tend toward disorder. Our lives tend toward disorder, our talents, our skills, our abilities, everything tends toward disorder, including the level of energy we have towards our objectives. So even though we start with a lot of energy towards our objective, we lose that energy. That energy is often unsustainable. And so what happens, if you remember that we start in this really incredibly tight focus around our objective. We're 100% emotionally engaged. We're in the state that Naheli Csikszentmihalyi, which I just love that name. It's the best name. The behavioral economist, he describes as flow. It's where we're 100% immersed and engulfed and engaged in our objective and the why. It's the why behind what we're doing. But then what happens is at some point there's some sort of a departure trigger. Either like we don't know how to move forward because we don't have a plan. And so because we don't have an idea of how to take those next steps, we don't take those next steps. And so we stop. Or maybe it's that we don't have space to move forward and we stall and we lose our momentum. Or maybe it's that we stop feeling like we're making a difference, or we don't have others on the journey, or we don't have an environment to support us, or we stop finding meaning, or we don't find a value in our pursuit, or we feel like we're not good enough, or we haven't, these are the elements that keep us engaged in our objective. These are the elements that prevent entropy. But when any one of these elements goes missing, what happens is we get that departure trigger, and now we go into this elliptical orbit. And now when we're over here, we've got emotional distance from our objective. We start to kind of be not quite as engaged, not quite as motivated, not quite as determined to make it happen. And we do this emotional distancing, and if we don't fix it, then what happens, which is, it's kind of covered. What happens is you get this solidifying resolve. It's where you galvanize your resolve of like, you know what, that was the wrong objective. It was either not right, or I decide I can't do it. Whatever it is, we start to convince ourselves to not continue to pursue that objective. We give up. And if nothing is done, then we go into that farther, which is the crystallization of discontent. And the crystallization of discontent is where we are simply waiting for the right moment to completely abandon the orbit of an objective that we were originally entirely sold on. And now, because of something went missing, and then more things went missing, and we did nothing about it, now we have this crystallized discontent, and we walk around thinking, life sucks, and I'll never succeed, and we hit that cliff like that bear, and we're just waiting to jump. And if nothing is done, then we finally reach what's called escape velocity, which is where we simply depart. We abandon our objective and we move on. Well, that's the journey of disengagement. But all of the while, there are these opportunities to re-engage. This is what a leader does. A leader, a coach, a mentor, a guide helps recognize when we are unfortunately distancing ourselves from our objective, and we start to depart from it. And they help us make the decision to re-engage. A leader starts to recognize when we're unnecessarily abandoning an objective that is right because it aligns to our identity. And they help us re-engage. And when we do re-engage, they help sustain and provide this emotional refueling that is necessary for us to re-enter the orbit of our original objective. That's what a leader does. They facilitate this journey of re-engagement in or around a healthy objective. By the same token, a leader or a mentor or a guide recognizes when we are orbiting an unhealthy system. And then they help us depart from it. They help us create emotional distancing from that unhealthy objective. They help us solidify our resolve to depart from it. They get us to the crystallization of discontent where we have maximum levels of cognitive dissonance until finally they facilitate escape velocity. Remember when we went through this, we're just talking about this is just the mechanics of gravitational systems. And gravitational systems in our life can either be healthy or unhealthy, and we have both. Knowing the mechanics of the gravitational systems allows us to depart from an unhealthy gravitational system and to stick to a healthy gravitational system. A leader is someone who helps us go through this and helps know the difference. So one of the things he said, Seth Godin talks about in this book, he says, it's the dip, a little book that teaches you when to quit and when to stick. So that we don't find ourselves relentlessly and doggedly pursuing an objective or an orbit that is not the right orbit for us. Because sometimes that happens. Sometimes we get into a career or we pursue an objective and then we get into the dip and now we're just determined by raw sheer force of will to get out of it. And maybe it's not the right thing. It's sometimes really hard because it gets cloudy when you're the one in there. A leader, a coach has that external perspective, allowing us to sort of see when we need to exit. Those are the intervention opportunities. Okay, so now, one more. So the purpose of the elements, of course, is that the more elements that we have active, they create the mass that gives us the gravitational pull to stay true to our objectives. So the question is, how do you find a leader? How do you find a leader? How do you find a mentor? How do you find a guide? Where do we find one? Well, the first thing that we need to know when we're looking for a mentor or a leader or a coach or a guide is that leadership is not about position. Leadership is about disposition. You don't have, finding a leader doesn't mean they have to have authority. They have to have, it has nothing to do with position. It has everything to do with disposition. So what do you think this means? What does this mean to you? Leadership is about position and not disposition.
I think a disposition of someone who wants to help, someone who cares about you, is invested in you. You know, not necessarily about any gain, but just someone that's helping you. Because I've had friends that are just friends who have a good time, and I've had friends that are sort of mentors that will mention to me, now, are you, just in walks, they'll kind of mentor me and say, so why is it that, you're still encouraging this, or you're still doing this with your kids?
They'll just ask
Point things out and just
questions.
kind of help me see things different. So I guess just the disposition to truly, help you get you to a better place.
Has anybody had one of these? A person who has been influential in your life, who really has no authority to influence you, but just does, has the disposition. And if so, what is it about them that causes you to let them coach you? What is the disposition of a leader that gives them the emotional permission to lead?
Yeah, I have a good friend who he is a colleague of mine, and we used to work together a little bit years ago, And I contacted him just recently, and he offered to coach me again. And what I really appreciated about re-engaging with him is that he helped me to see my value and my worth. And he was kind, he was generous, he was just had a great desire to see me succeed. And that
A desire
was
to see.
what I needed.
A desire to see you succeed. What else? What should we be looking for? What is the disposition of a leader? If we're going to trust somebody enough to invite them into our operating room to critique us, who are we looking for? What type of person are we looking for? Tyson, did you have
Rusty, I'll
something?
comment on that. I do. Can you hear me?
Yep, go for it.
I think the type of person that you're looking for really is you're looking for someone that's going to be selfless. A good leader is going to be someone who puts other people first. And if you look at that, that rings true in lots of different areas. It rings true in the tenets or the leaders in church leadership. It rings true in tenets of national leadership. People that typically that are good, that you want to follow are like that. Now, on the other side of that, there are people that are in positions that just are tyrannical and scary to death. Those are not people that you want to follow willingly. A good leader is someone that's going to generate people that will want to follow them. I have someone at work, and that's what I've noticed about him. I've worked with him both as a colleague, and he was I was one of his direct reports this last year. And what I find interesting about him is that the people that work for him, report to him, would do literally anything for him, because he's just created that kind of loyalty, because that's the way that he's treated them. So that's really what you're looking for. If you're looking for someone to follow, you want someone that's going to put you, honestly, in a lot of cases, ahead of them.
That was my fault. I put it on mute so that you wouldn't have. So I love that. I love the idea. So being a leader is selfless and puts you first, or puts others first. I also love what you said about how a leader. It's funny. There's a book. There's always a book. There's a book. I'm trying to remember which one. And it talked about the surest sign that someone is a leader is that they have followers. There are people who just follow them. And so because they do that. And you talked about this, how if someone is just a natural leader, there are going to be natural followers. And so our ability, the reason why this is pertinent, by the way, is that genuinely, and if you go back to this TED Talk that we watched at the beginning, I firmly believe that our level of success in life will correlate to our ability to access leaders and coaches who help us get unstuck, who invite us to be better, who, when we slip to the bottom and fall to the cliff, stand at the top of the mountain and say, come on, you can do it. Our ability to find and access these types of leaders in our lives is going to be correlated to our level of success. If we want to
Rusty?
be incredibly, yeah.
I'm
Go ahead.
sorry, I'm going to cut you off.
Please do. No, go ahead.
Actually, what I was going to say, you probably don't have to turn that on me. I think the echo I'm hearing is actually just hearing myself speak to you. So I don't think there's an echo. So that's first of all. But the other thing I wanted to say is that in addition to what you just said, we want to become those kind of people too. I think our success is dependent on us becoming the leader so that others can follow us and we can help other people too. That's also contingent upon us being successful, is to be that person.
It's funny. I don't know. There's all this, the law of attraction. You're familiar with the law of attraction? The law of attraction is it's also known in scriptures as the law of the harvest, or the law of restoration, that all things are restored to their natural order. It's this law that whatever you put out into the universe comes back. It's whatever you plant and sow, you reap. And so it's fascinating because the more you become selfless and put others first, the more you desire to see others succeed, the more you try to lead and help others be successful in your life, the more you'll find other people do the same. They reciprocate. Other people do the same for you. And it's fascinating because when you act as a leader, when you try genuinely to help others, it forces you to stand on high ground, because you know that people are relying on you, and you know that they're looking to you, and you like, it's hard to languish in the dip if you know you're a leader and you have people who are relying on you. And so it's interesting that being a leader is connected to having a leader. So I like that. I love that you said that. Okay. So what we're trying to do is build up the ability to identify leaders. Because here's what happens. If you invite the wrong person to come and give you leadership and coaching and guidance, you're inviting them to influence how you act and how you behave. And so if you find the wrong person, you're manufacturing an influence in your life that might not be in alignment with your identity, with your values, with what is meaningful to you. And so our ability to identify a leader that is right for us is critical to our ability to find a leader who's going to help us move forward in life. Yes. Oh yeah, you had a question or something.
The mentors or the coaches or the people that have influenced me the most have been individuals that I could absolutely, completely trust, which, by the way, encompasses multiple things.
Attributes.
Multiple attributes and characteristic traits. Trust is by far the most important, because if there is trust, then he can call you out on your baloney. If there's no trust, he will withhold.
Yeah.
If he withholds, you will not approve. So I like the people that have served me have been people I've completely trusted, and I've given them the green light to call me out on my baloney. And that's the only way I can grow. Somebody that I have enough, cojones to call you out.
Yep, that's right. We're going to come back to that one because I think that's a huge one in finding a leader and inviting someone. So before we move to the next slide, because this is how it works. This is just how it works, which is this amazing, magical, wonderful thing, is that we have this sort of inner compass. Call it what you want, but we have this sort of inner compass that helps, that kind of gives us, sort of emotional nudges, whatever you want to call that thing. So as we've been talking about someone who has the disposition to be a leader in your life, write down the name of who you were thinking about. In big bold letters, and then put a box around it and underline it. And if there is nobody, that's okay. But if there was someone you were thinking about as we were talking about the disposition of a leader, someone who you can trust, someone who is selfless and puts others first, someone who has a desire to see you succeed, put a box around that, because you need to invite that person to become a coach, a mentor, a leader, and a guide in your life. Ellie.
Is there only one?
No, there should be.
You can have like one for each contact.
Yes!
Okay.
You are awesome. You're just jumping ahead.
Sorry.
That's not something to apologize. It's great. So what you will find actually is, and the best, so a professional football team, right? So these are the highest paid athletes in the world. I know it's crazy, right? How much they make. They don't have a head coach and no other coaches. There's an offensive lineman coach. There's a defensive back coach. There is a coach for every discipline. And so in our lives, when we have, it makes sense. And sometimes you'll have a coach who will be a coach for multiple things. But often what happens is you should find a coach for every objective. And maybe for every context. Because if you have an objective of, Austin, I want to be a leader and an entrepreneur, then you want to find someone who is a leader and an entrepreneur who you can tap into and you can go and ask and you can say, I'm stuck. Help me know why. If you have an objective of whatever your objective is, like finding a leader who has done that thing or who can help you with that thing. So a leader for a context, a leader for an objective, also a leader for an element. It could be that you have, that certain elements for you are going to be hard. Here's one, identity. It very well could be that because this often happens, that we just are someone who loves to punch ourselves in the face and beat ourselves up. And we beat ourselves up all the time. And so when you find someone who sees you for who you can be and not for who you are, someone who loves you and sees the very best in you, then you want to invite that person into your life to be a leader, to refresh your own perspective of your identity. It could be that, so in other words, have a team of coaches in your life. And that team might change as a context changes, as an objective changes, as a need arises where you're like, hey, one of my elements is missing and I need some help on that thing. The bigger and more carefully cultivated your team of coaches are, the more likely you are to be able to make it through the dip. Because when you get stuck, they will help you get out. If you only have one person in your life who is acting as a mentor, or a coach, or leader, or a guide, then you're really putting all your eggs in one basket. So yes, have a team. Excellent. Do you remember sympathetic resonance? Did we talk about sympathetic resonance?
Okay, check it out.
Sympathetic resonance or sympathetic vibration is a harmonic phenomenon wherein a formerly passive string, okay, that's too technical. That's really awesome. I didn't plan that, but thank you, Siri. Okay, so sympathetic resonance is this. It's where you take a tuning fork that is a C and you strike it and you hold it up next to a tuning fork that is also a C. This one will start to vibrate. And it's never hit anything, but the waves, the sound waves coming off of this C tuning fork will hit this tuning fork and will cause it to vibrate in harmony. It will cause it to vibrate sympathetic to the resonance of this one. And so you see sympathetic resonance all over. You see it so by the way, they now build bridges. Did I tell you about the bridge? So they built this bridge. There's a video, YouTube video. I should have pulled it up. There's a YouTube video. If you search sympathetic resonance on YouTube, you'll find this video of a bridge. So it used to be a long time ago, before they understood about sympathetic resonance, they didn't plan for sympathetic resonance in the bridges. And so there was the wind that was blowing through the cables on the bridge and causing a sound that caused the whole bridge to vibrate in the waveform of the sound. And so you see this bridge and it's like, I mean, it's a span of, maybe 100 yards. And this bridge is like going like this and it's just buckling and waving. It's crazy. So now when they build bridges, they have to make sure that they build these bridges and structures, buildings, so that it accounts for sympathetic resonance, because it can be incredibly disruptive. But in our own lives, this happens. We have people who just resonate with us. Like there's just people who like you get around them and it's like you were cut from the same cloth, or you were built out of the same mold. Like they just sing your language, like they speak your language and sing your song, and so those are people who get you. If you invite someone to be a leader in your life who doesn't get you, who you're a C and they're a D, then sometimes it can be hard, because what they'll be trying to influence you to do is stuff that that doesn't resonate with you. So when you're inviting a leader into your life, you want to make sure that this is someone who sings your song, who speaks your language. Okay, it's someone, and this is what Pete was talking about, it's someone who will hold you accountable and force you to grow, who has the ability to, let's skip to this. So have you heard the phrase radical candor? If you haven't read, there's a book, of course there's a book. There's a book called Radical Candor, and it's really awesome. And it's written by a gal who was an executive at, I don't know, it was a search company. It was either Google or Yahoo, and she was a marketing vice president. And she went, and now she's a CEO, and she has her own company, and she runs a company of training based on this idea of radical candor. But she was the head of marketing at one of these, it was, I think it was Google, and she had to present to the executive team. So she comes out of this meeting and she was feeling really, really good because she had prepared really well, and she just felt like it really resonated, and she was really happy. And so she was walking down the hall, and gosh, it might have been Sheryl Sandberg. I mean, it's a name that you would recognize, most of you would recognize. Anyway, she's walking down the hall with, so she's the VP of marketing, walking down the hall with the chief marketing officer, and the chief marketing officer says, "How did you feel like that went?" And she's like, "Oh, I think it was great. Like, I think everybody really got it." And you know, she was just started to go. And then she started to recognize that this chief marketing officer wasn't saying anything in response. And so finally she's like, "How did you think it went?" And she's like, "Well, you said a lot." And she was kind of affronted. She's like, "Wow, of all of this huge presentation of all this content and how awesome it was, like, you're saying I said a lot." And she's like, "Oh, yeah, I mean, sometimes when I'm nervous, I say a lot." And then she tried to just start dismissing it. And then the person sort of stopped in the hall and says, "No, let me make sure you understand. You say a lot. In fact, you say so much that it makes you sound stupid. And you're not stupid. And I know you're not stupid. But when you speak, you say enough that you sound stupid. I want to help you overcome that, because I want to make sure that you can have the influence that you deserve to have." And this person who was the recipient of this radical candor started thinking about it. She's like, "I am so grateful, because here I had led a life of like in leadership and executive positions, and I'd gotten all the way here, and no one had ever had the candor to come to me and say, 'You say a lot.'" And so she talks about how there's really 4 squares. So here you have someone who cares personally and someone who challenges directly. So if you are in this square, which is where you don't challenge directly and you don't care, this is just manipulative insincerity. If you are someone who cares a lot, but you don't confront it, this is ruinous empathy, in that you remain ignorant. You don't know what's missing, and so you make no change. Someone who challenges directly but doesn't care, this is just aggressively obnoxious. And you get defensive and you have little change. But someone who is up here, who cares personally and is willing to challenge you directly, they are willing to be radically candid. And that is what creates growth and profound change. And so when we're searching for leaders in our lives, we want to search for people who are willing to be radically candid. So this goes to what Pete says. If you have someone who gives you candid feedback, but you don't have the trust and the respect and the relationship with them where you know that they actually they're doing this, they're giving you this feedback because they are selfless, they're not thinking of themselves, they have a desire to see you succeed. Like, if you know that love is not the motivator, then you have the wrong reaction. Yeah.
Even if they counsel you the right way.
Even if it's the right counsel, you will emotionally respond the wrong way. And so when you are inviting a leader, you want to invite someone who you know will be honest, but will be motivated by love. So if you find someone who you know will be honest, but is not motivated by love, it's not going to be good. If you find someone who is motivated by love but is not willing to be honest, you will not change. Like you can go on walks with people who you know love you and you can invite them to give you feedback, but if they're not willing to give you the top feedback, this is the ruinous empathy. Their love and empathy for you, their desire to not hurt your feelings will cause you to remain in ignorance so that there is no change. And so it's this really hard thing. Like you want to be able to find a leader who will be radically candid with you. So I had one of those experiences. I was also in sales, and I used to do sales for Cisco, the food company, and this was my least favorite job of my entire life. And I was really excited because like I went through, they have this sales, this training program, and I was the first person in the history to get 100% on this, really, like it was a huge test on food. I can tell you everything about water content and ham and lettuce quality and like all of these things that I just don't even care about knowing. So I was like, I'm gonna nail it. I was so excited to get out in the field. I was like, I'm gonna do so good. I'll be the best salesperson. I'm gonna make a ton of money. And I sucked. I was the worst. And I was like, ah. And my district leader was like this wonderful, caring, loving person who just crushed my soul. And he's like, let's do a ride along. I want to see what's happening. So we do this ride along and we get back in the car. By the way, if you've never done ride-alongs in sales, it's like the worst. It's the worst. I should not use that. It's the worst. So we're doing this ride-along. We did a couple of visits. We got back in the car, and this guy, his name's Gene, and he says, you know, Rusty, he says, you're book smart, but you are not street smart. And he says, you need to find a different job. And I'm like, are you firing me? And he's like, no. Not yet. But he's like, you really need to find something that leverages your strengths because this is not it. And I was like mad and hurt and petulant. And I was like, I'll show you. But after a little bit of time, I started realizing that he was absolutely right. And so I got out of sales and it was the best thing that's ever happened to me because I'm not a salesperson. You need access to people in your life who love you enough to be honest. Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah.
That's what I was. Yeah,
Amen.
It's a friend, like that's what I said at the beginning. There's a difference in someone that really cares about you and is willing to tell you, and
Yes.
that's what. Yeah, that's.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Pete, did you have something? Yeah.
Yeah, so most people, if they have that person in their life, two things will happen. They'll either gravitate and improve, or they'll like defriend.
Reject them. Yeah.
No, they're done.
Yeah. Because I can't handle it.
And they either move away from them
Or they.
or they embrace them.
Yeah.
And the ones that embrace will improve and
Yeah.
escalate, and the others will just kind of keep going the way they've been going.
Now, you won't find, not usually anyway, a single leader that includes every attribute of all that we're talking about. So I'm not saying reject any potential coach that doesn't have all of these. But as you are assembling your coaching staff for your life, look for someone who is willing to be radically candid. Look for, oh yeah.
I'm sorry, one more thing back to what Ellie mentioned earlier. She hit it right on the head when she said, yeah, can you have multiple,
Yeah.
people in your life that influence you? And of course, because everybody's a specialist in something.
Yeah, something.
But, that person has to be someone you can trust, someone who will challenge you by calling you out. But, they've got to be like qualified, right?
Yeah.
Like they've been there.
Right. Yeah.
They've done it. They've been there. And so, you have to be careful, to make sure those three elements are there.
And this is important because just remember that there's a couple things we're saying. Number one, go assemble a coaching team for your life. Like this is life. If these coaches can make millions of dollars for football, like like we deserve to have coaches in our lives. So assemble a team. Just remember that as you're assembling your team and you're inviting these people to be influencers in your life, you have to be careful about who you assemble and how you give them influence. So another one is that they will help you break your functional fixedness. They will help you recognize when you are not seeing the world clearly. They will recognize when you are the elephant with a rope wrapped around your ankle. And they will recognize when you're not moving forward because you have stopped to see the context of the world. And so these are people who have that bigger perspective and they see the bigger context. And then finally, that was finally. So I have one more video and then our homework. So you guys have heard of Google? Right? Yeah. Okay, so here's Eric Schmidt, CEO of Google. Here's what he has to say.
Everyone needs a coach. It doesn't matter whether you're a basketball player, a tennis player, a gymnast, or a bridge player. My bridge coach, Sharon Osberg, says there are more pictures of the back of her head than anyone else's in the world. Sorry, Sharon. Here you go. We all need people who will give us feedback. That's how we improve.
Over the years, I've received so many different kinds of advice, I don't know where to start. One that comes to mind is to have a coach. Our board member in 2002, John Doerr, said, "You need a coach." And I said, "Well, I don't need a coach. I'm an established CEO. Why would I need a coach? Is something wrong?" He said, No, you need a coach. Everybody needs a coach. So Bill Campbell became my coach and has served Google very well. Every famous athlete, every famous performer has somebody who's a coach. Somebody who can watch what they're doing and say, is that what you really meant? Did you really do that? They can give them perspective. The one thing people are never good at is seeing themselves as others see them. A coach really, really helps.
Okay, so here's your homework. Go assemble a coaching staff for your life. Go find a leader. Find one for each objective, or identify or find one, at least one coach, period. Even if you can't find one for each objective or each context, or just go find at least one coach. But optimally, you should immediately start to pursue an endeavor where you are assembling a coaching staff for your life. If you care about your life and you care about the ultimate outcome of your life and you care about being successful in life, find coaches. Like, this is not rocket science anymore. This is absolutely fundamental principles. If you want to grow, if you want to be better, you have to have access to a coach, to a leader, to a guide. So go find that team, because that team doesn't usually materialize in front of you. Like, you often have to go pursue them, give them permission, give them access, find a coach. Second, be a leader. Find a leader and be a leader. We talked about this. Go become a leader. Find one person who you can support on their journey. This is that law that we talked about, law of attraction. If you want to find a leader, go be a leader. It's amazing how that works. Go be a leader. And the moment you become a leader in someone else's life, you will start to recognize how it forces you to stand on higher ground. It's an amazing thing. Okay, very simple, right? Just go assemble a coaching staff for life. Easy homework today. I'll follow up next week. I want to hear who your coaching staff is. Yes, Pete.
Yeah, I want to say something on that. So, we can pay for these people,
Yep.
right? But we all have people in our lives that care about us to the point where you don't have to pay them.
Yep.
So this doesn't have to be something you have to pay for.
Good point.
There are people in your neighborhood, in your church group, in your school, in your profession.
Family.
Family members, of course, extended family. They don't have to live here either. You can talk to people on the phone.
Yep.
So don't feel like, oh man, I can't afford this. This is like literally free. There are plenty of people. If you say to them, hey, can you help me out once in a while if I call you, I'm starting something, they would love to do it for you. So this is free.
Yeah,
You can pay for it too, but it's all for you.
yeah, agreed.